I'll give it a second. Okay. All right. Um, Welcome everyone. Today I have Pluto with me, and we're going to be talking about self-love and toxic relationships and how to get past some of the major things that hold us back from really living a fulfilled life. And you and I were talking earlier, and we were talking about how sometimes being in these toxic relationships are one of the major things that holds us back. And I think that that's actually probably a really good start for us to kind of understand how that reflects our self-love. I'm gonna kind of give you the floor on this one because you were already starting before we started recording, and I was like, whoa, whoa, hold on, we gotta record this. So go ahead, have the floor.
Gosh, I just well, first of all, happy New Year to everyone, and many blessings to you. I hope that this year is truly the year of change and transformation for you, so that you can bring in the gifts and the blessings that you deserve. And I definitely have been having a number of conversations with people recently about the idea of self love, what that is, and how to achieve that. It's a big topic, I think, in the self the self help sphere, as well as the spiritual community. But I think that the concept of it remains quite ambiguous to people. So what I like to do is just kind of first really consider what the definition of something is. And if we think about what love is, many people consider love to be a feeling, but really love is an action. It's a verb.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you know what? You just hit the nail on the head. That is exactly right, because people, when they say, "I don't love this person anymore," it's because they're choosing not to. And it's love is an action. It's like when somebody says that, "Oh, but I love him." I'm like, "That's not love, that's addiction." That
Yeah,
is
it certainly can be,
mhm,
talk. Going into the toxic relationships kind of arena, maybe as a side quest for now that we can return to. Um, a lot of toxicity is really founded in addictive behavior.
mhm.
Codependency, I think, is a really great example of that. Codependency is, in my opinion, a drug that is highly addictive.
Mhm.
People cannot, fathom being without someone. If somebody, removes themselves from, their presence from someone for a period of time, that person can have a very negative reaction. I actually witnessed this recently when I took some time, for myself and my family when we were experiencing an extended hospital stay that resulted, subsequently in the death of a loved one. I took time away from the platform, from my spiritual order, uh, because I knew I needed to conserve my mental and emotional resources. And I experienced backlash from some people. There were people who literally tried to make me feel guilty, about being gone, and really tried to make the situation about themselves. And I recognize the codependency in that. But codependency is just, it can be so innocuous. I think it's become really normalized in our society, especially with social media, where people perceive they have access to someone all the time, or they should have unfettered access to someone all the time. If you don't respond to someone's text messages in a time length that the other person feels is reasonably acceptable, that can result in a backlash. Same thing on social media. You're not responding to my post, you're not replying to this and that. These things are considered normal, and people will make you feel guilty about that or bad about that if you're not doing that. But it's toxic. It's toxic, and it's just a representation of codependence. And if you really think about it, who actually deserves unfettered access to you at all times? In my opinion, for myself, it's literally my son and his father. That's it. Like, those are the only two people on the planet that get unfettered access to me. So even when I'm going through periods of self-care, they'll always be able to have access to me. But aside from that, unless somebody's in danger, somebody is dying, etc., for me, I may love people very much and want to be in their life and have relationships with them. But if I have to enter into a period of self-care, you know, I I'll sometimes say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I have to take care of myself, I have to take care of my family. I have to tend to, an extenuating circumstance. But, you know, it's been very interesting for me to kind of witness how even that is, some people will make that seem as if it's inappropriate.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think that we live in a society where you can get a hold of somebody you have multiple ways of getting a hold of them, and when a person doesn't respond, it feels like you're being ghosted. And or they're just putting something else that has a higher priority or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I know personally that I'm guilty of behaving that way sometimes, like with my family members. And it's like when I call my mom and she doesn't answer the phone, or I text her and she doesn't reply, I'm like, I know you keep that phone right next to you all the time. Why are you not picking it up? You know? And and I think that we've gotten so used to as a society of knowing that you have that very fast reaction of being able to connect with somebody, that when you don't and there's some time, you start thinking something's wrong. And I think um I think most people would agree that that's how they feel. That if there's not a response to something, that they do kind of feel like maybe something's happened to them, or are they in the hospital, or is there, I mean, because I know personally that there's certain people I know that don't respond quickly, and there's some people I know that do. And like my sister, for example, I know that she doesn't keep her phone close to her. I know that she's also ADD. And so there's a lot of things that I know about her that I can look at and go, I'm not going to get offended because I know how she is. But I also have to stay on top of it because she is ADD. And that means that she'll forget that I've texted her and it'll just fly off her head and she'll go on to the next thing. So sometimes I have to stay fairly aggressive about it. Like if I do need to get a hold of her, I'll have to send her a message, I wait patiently, then I come back a little bit later and say, "Hey, what's going on?" And she'll go, "Oh, I just saw your message." 3 days later. You know? And so it's like sometimes you have to take into consideration, and I think that this is where where the self-love kinda comes in, is that you have to realize that people respond or think differently than you do, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you also have to consider what's appropriate.
Mhm,
I get the same way with my son and his father. If I reach out to them and I don't hear a response in a certain period of time, I do get
mhm,
worried. And wonder if it's okay. And I know that my son's father is the same way with me. I was out shopping the other day, and I was supposed to pick him up to get his new car, and in my mind, we had determined, I was going to shop for about 2 hours and I was going to give him a call. Well, he got finished up with the car thing, and he was texting me and messaging me, and I have my phone on silent because I also am ADD. So all the beeps and the pings and the notifications, like, because I'm auditorily sensitive, they make me anxious. So I just
mhm.
check my phone from time to time. Well, he had been freaking out, but it's like, to me, that's a situation where it's more appropriate to have a
Mhm.
response like that. It's not appropriate when it's just like, you know, you let people know, hey, I'm taking some time off, and then you have, people literally calling you and texting you with this kind of selfish, mentality. Well, why aren't you being there for me? Well, because I'm being there for myself. And that takes courage. And I think that goes really into this topic of self-love is if you want to learn self-love or you want to engage in self-love or you want to implement the act of self-love, you also have to be courageous because uh, people have their own expectations. Like you said, people think about things differently than you do. And you have to be able to set up boundaries and let people know what's appropriate and inappropriate. I'm just straight up with people. I just tell people, look, unless it's an emergency, if you're calling and texting me, if I look and I see it's not an emergency and I have other things going on, I'll get back to you when I can. And I do that not only for myself, but for others. If I'm taking a hike with my friend, I want to spend time with my friend exclusively. I don't want to, be on this, spend time with my friend, and then I have to sit here and check my text messages all the time. That doesn't demonstrate love to them, and it doesn't demonstrate self love to me. I'm
Mhm.
taking time for myself to engage with a friend. And I want them to know that I'm there for them. And so everybody in my life knows that when I'm hanging out with them, when I'm chatting with them, I'm not on my phone checking messages and stuff. The only time I'll do that is if I know that it's an emergency or, if it's my son or someone that calls, that is in the unfettered tier, unfettered access tier, right?
Mhm.
We also demonstrate love by the way that we show love to others. And I think that the idea of having exclusive time where you're not on your phone, where you're not being distracted, is a key way to demonstrate love, not just for yourself, but for others. And especially for yourself, because a lot of people are not courageous enough or strong enough to actually take time for themselves. And so when they don't take time for themselves to refresh and relax or process difficult times in their life or challenges or transformations, then you can't engage in life fully, and you don't communicate to yourself that you're important enough to actually take time. And I feel like that's a huge point is if you want to engage in the act of self-love, you have to communicate to yourself that you are important enough to do the things that you need to act out of love, whether that's taking time for yourself, setting boundaries, removing distractions, doing something nice for yourself. I mean, most people just spend all day, every day giving themselves away to anyone and everyone and get themselves caught up in this anxiety loop. They can't
Mhm.
remove themselves from it. So if you never communicate to yourself that you're worthy of love and worthy of taking time for yourself and treating yourself well, how will you ever really experience self-love?
Mm. Well, I think that when I think about self-love, I think about it as, making decisions for myself, not for others. I think that when I'm working with clients, one of the biggest things that I see is that they're so concerned about what other people think, and they're making all their decisions based on that. And and so when they want to do something that their soul is saying, "This is what you need to do," like their sense of purpose is being, elevated inside, their spirit's trying to jump out and say, "Hey, you need to do this, you need to do this." But all this fear comes in because the next thought that comes up is this fear of what other people are gonna think. And, I years ago, I had this, client that I was working with, and, um, it was just something, simple that we were working on. It was, weight loss or something like that. It was just, doing hypnosis to kinda help her with something. Um, After we started making this connection and we were talking a lot afterwards because it wasn't like a, um, transformative relationship. I wasn't like I was her therapist in this angle. And we started chatting and we kinda got to be friends on Facebook and all this other stuff, and she she basically came back to me and told me that she had to unfriend me on Facebook. And I asked her why, and she said, "Because you have, the things that you say that you are, you know, I can't be seen being friends with somebody like you because I'd be judged." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Oh, you say that you're a Reiki healer and, some of the things you post, and I'm afraid that people are gonna judge me for that, and so we'll have to keep our friendship secret." I was like, "What?" You know what I mean? And that's what I mean. It's like people make decisions on what everybody else thinks. They're thinking from a sheep mentality versus a self mentality. And as long as we're thinking about what everybody else is thinking versus what we need personally or what we desire personally, it's one of those things where you've got to make a decision. Are you living for everybody else or are you living for yourself? And you know, but there's such a fine line there because then you start getting into a selfish behavior, then there's that narcissistic space that you can jump into, so it's a very fine line of, trying to understand where that space is of self-love. Are you loving yourself so much so that you're becoming a narcissist and you don't really care about anybody else? You don't want to go that far. It really kind of comes down to the middle path. And that's like you don't want to go so far over here that all you think about is me, me, me. And you don't want to be so far over here that you think about everybody else is more important than yourself. It's really kind of finding that balance, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. That I think it's important for us to define how do we know when that balance is there, or when we're going off to one side of the fence or the other, right?
Mhm.
And when it comes to narcissistic people, this is another thing that can be quite innocuous, especially with narcissism, because narcissists, like true narcissists, are they're expert manipulators, right?
Mhm.
So I actually almost don't want to use that term narcissism. I might maybe be more comfortable with being selfish, but narcissism is really like a clinical extreme to selfishness, and
Mhm.
it presents itself in the way of that person cannot perceive the emotions of another
Mhm.
or understand how their actions impact another person. If somebody's being selfish, they can just not care, right, what other people think. And I think that that's a nice way to start kind of defining where, where the space lies. When it comes to giving yourself away all the time to everyone else and literally living your life based on the opinions or expectations of others, I find this to be the more prominent kind of epidemic that we have in our society today. We are conditioned from when we're very young to always do everything for everyone else first. Otherwise, we're sinning, essentially. We are being selfish. How dare you do that? Why aren't you thinking about how this impacts another person? And ever from the time we're very, very young, all the way through school, right, and up into our adulthood, we have this constant reinforcement uh, placed on us pertaining to giving ourselves away to others, and it stems from a spiritual value, right, which I think is important, which is learning how to be selfless, compassionate, and care for others. But taking that spiritual value and twisting it into something that creates a structure in your life where essentially you're being controlled by your own personal subconscious thoughts, your anxieties, your fears, or the codependency of others or the toxicity of others under this guise that you're somehow not a good person because you are acting out of self-love or self-care. That's where it becomes toxic and can even become abusive.
Mhm.
So understanding, I think your reaction to something is the best way to help you to define whether you're being imbalanced or not. Asking yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I really need to do it? Am I doing this because it's critical? Or am I just doing this because I feel like I have to do it? Otherwise, dot, 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 right? If you say to yourself, well, I have to do it because dot, 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 you should certainly explore the reason behind that. And I mean, I've seen this in just all kinds of like very interesting ways, right? A lot of people are thinking about extremes, but I remember I was at this lady's house one time, and her 15-year-old son is getting into the shower and she has guests. And what does she do? Well, she gets up to go scramble around to get him clothes, underwear, towels. And I said to her, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll be right back." She's super conflicted because there's the part of her that wants to be there and host her guests because that's the right thing to do. But then there's this part of her that couldn't, stop herself from running around after her teenage son, who clearly can get his own clothes and towel, etc. Right? That's how deep it can get for
Mhm.
people. They develop expectations that are unhealthy for themselves.
Mhm.
Why did she have to get up to go get her 15-year-old son underwear for the shower? Well, she didn't have to do that, but she made herself believe she had to for some reason or another, and then it caused a conflict in her because she felt like she was being rude to her guests.
Mhm.
Um, Going over to the side of selfishness, what really defines being selfish? And I think that's where, the line is a lot harder for people to draw because of this unhealthy attitude we've developed in our society pertaining to what it means to be a good person, um, and demonstrating that by being compassionate and selfless, etc. I'll take another like example here real quick. I've seen a few people recently extract themselves from very toxic relationships, and they sat here on the phone with me and told me all about how terrible this person is, everything that person did, that demonstrated they were being mistreated, mentally and emotionally abused, etc., and that they weren't ever going to go back to that. And I even had one person say to me, "Look, if you see me start going back to the situation, I want you to just ride me. I want you to tell me no. I want you to you know, uh, just give it to me." Right? It was like they had a moment of clarity where they recognized this is not where they want to go, and then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, they're back with the same exact person, right? And so I did what they asked me to do. I said, "Hey, look, you know, um, you told me to tell you no, tell you all the reasons why, et cetera, et cetera." And then what happens in their mind? Oh well, everybody deserves a second chance. I'm trying to be loving, compassionate, understanding, et cetera, et cetera. Right? They're taking that really inappropriate way into selflessness, right?
Mhm.
And essentially creating, making themselves now more into a victim and reinforcing that toxic behavior because that person who's a manipulator, the real narcissist, right? They don't, they derive their power from that. I mean, the a person who is a master manipulator like that, they will say and do anything. They'll literally get down on the floor on their hands and knees. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I did all this stuff." And then they'll do this like little short term like band-aid fixing situation. And they make you believe that they're changing and they're sorry, etc. Right? But all they're trying to do really is essentially get back into your pants. Because as soon as they do that, right now you've opened yourself up again to them and to their control over you. And they
Mhm.
know that they have you, right? So um is it selfish, to say no to those people? Is it selfish to say, well, no, you don't get a second chance? Absolutely not. Right? Is it selfish to say, hey, look, kid, go get your own underwear? No, it's not selfish. Right? Is it selfish to say, hey, guess what, kids? You can go make your own breakfast this morning. I worked 60 hours this week. I've been cleaning the house, taking you to sports, etc. I'm going to sleep in. Is it selfish? No, it's not selfish, right? Selfishness comes when you are engaging in your own self interest at the expense of others in a way that's harmful. And I think that that is really maybe where we can truly define the imbalance in on both sides of the fence. Is, are your actions resulting in harm to yourself or others?
Mhm.
If it's not inherently resulting in a harm to some degree, that could be mental, emotional, physical, whatever, you're probably not being you're probably not engaging in the imbalance. But that also is perceptual because we can make ourselves believe anything we want, right? Oh, well, if I don't answer the phone this time when my friend is calling me, I'm going to hurt their feelings, right? Is that appropriate or not? It just depends. Maybe if somebody is having a real serious incident, yeah, okay, it's, you definitely should answer the phone. But if they're just calling you to shoot the shit and you need some time for yourself, it's not selfish to say no. So a person has to be able to be real with themselves and to negate the kind of like bullshit, um, you know, uh, stories they create for themselves in their head. And that takes a lot of courage.
Mm. Well, I know that, there was a point in my life where I was, not exhibiting self-love, and I was, um I was aware of it because I would even say it to myself, "I don't like who I am." No, I didn't like myself, and I came to a point to where I realized that all my relationships, I was constantly being hurt by people because here's the thing, I chose people that were toxic, and I chose them because I was toxic, and they were in alignment with the vibration that I was as a person. And so for me to choose friends that are at a different level would have been very uncomfortable for me. I wouldn't have been able to do it, I couldn't do it.
And you
So
probably didn't believe you deserved to have better than that
I
either.
personally thought that I would be judged by them. That's the mindset I was in. I didn't um I looked at them completely different, like as if they were going to be very judgmental of who I was as a person. So I felt that I had to have friends that were like me, that had problems. And, you know, that's where I stood, and it wasn't until I decided to start working on those problems within myself and change who I was, that I started noticing that those people were not in alignment with me anymore. And when I decided to, all of my friends now are either way more intelligent than me, which it's not a criticism to myself. That's the kind of people I like to choose. I like to have friends that have PhDs or, really, really accomplished, powerful women because it's something, it's sort of like they say, you can tell what kind of person a person is by the friends they choose. And if like like that saying they say, if you want a promotion, you dress for the job that you want, or you behave the way that what you're looking for, desiring. It's it's like for me to choose people like that, that's like something that I want, that I'm aligning with. It's like I'm aligning with that because I believe that I'm getting there, versus aligning with somebody that was very toxic and problematic. Because when you hang out with those kind of people, is those people that are very hurt, they're going to hurt you because hurt people. And I know this because I was a hurt person. And if somebody didn't return my phone call, started not texting me back after I texted them, and waited 24 hours or 48 hours, I would literally have a meltdown, and it would cause like this major trigger inside of me that would cause me to have a straight up meltdown, like a psychotic break, like, why are you doing this to me? Because I would get so triggered by all the pain that had happened over and over again. And then I would become the victimizer towards that person. Do you see what I'm saying? And so
Oh, yeah.
I was choosing people like that as well. So they were victimizing me, I was victimizing them, and it was this nasty, vicious cycle. Why? Because I didn't love myself. I didn't like anything about myself. And it wasn't until somebody said, "Well, then create yourself the way that you would love. Recreate yourself. Change it. Change that story." And I decided that that's what I was going to do. I decided to make myself into a person that I believed was likable or worthy, and eventually it got to a point to where I was like, I really like who I am. I like my life, I like my friends, I like the people that I hang out with. I like the fact that I can call somebody up and we can have a great conversation and laugh and, talk about serious things, or we can talk about funny things, or we can, just have a nice conversations with people
Meaningful
versus, yeah,
conversation.
meaningful yeah, exactly, meaningful. And that means so much more to me because I feel like I'm always happy. And people ask me, "How does that happen?" Or, like, look, if I can do it, and I was the worst of all worst, I can tell you, I was the
I
bottom.
don't know. I feel like I could be throwing myself in the ring there.
I'm telling you, I was the bottom of the barrel. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's kind of like, what I try to tell people. It's like, look, the reason why I'm good at helping people at the job that I have, because I was you. And
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? And so, like, I get it. I understand, you know, but the first steps to really loving yourself, because you can sit here and say all day long, and this just from your friend that you talk to that you're telling him about. You can sit here and tell people all day long that they shouldn't go back to toxic relationships, but they're going to.
Yeah,
They're
until
gonna
they're ready, until
Yeah,
they're
well,
ready.
they've got to decide that they're important enough to have something that has more value. Otherwise, they're not gonna believe that they deserve to have somebody that has value. I know that, I was that person. I didn't believe that I could have somebody in my life, female or male, that had a certain value, because I didn't believe that I had the value. So
Yes, this is interesting because one thing I'm recognizing is that you and I had similar pasts,
mhm,
right? And in our youth was marked by a number of toxic relationships, whether they were friendships or relationships with significant others or maybe even family members, right? But we took two different approaches to
mhm,
healing from that. You took the approach of just inherently recognizing that you didn't want to live this life anymore, and transforming and changing yourself first, and then watching how that changed your outer world,
mhm,
right? Like the
mhm,
as within, so without.
mhm,
But interestingly enough, when it comes to that, what I call a master equation, I believe that the saying "as within, so without" is a master formula,
mhm,
essentially, right? When you have a formula in mathematics, both sides of the equation are balanced out,
Mhm.
right? So in this case, we have as above equals so below, right?
Mhm.
Or as I like to say, as within, so without. I took the opposite route. I I recognized that um, I was never going to change until I first changed my external world.
Oh,
I was
wow.
too heavily impacted by others to be, at that point in my life, to be able to be courageous to make my own changes. And
Mhm.
so what I did is I cut out all the toxic people. And I did this actually after I was listening to this YouTube video one time, and there was this, he was a financial advisor, and he came in all hard. He was like, yeah, I was like 17, I was a gangbanger and all this kind of stuff. And, somebody came up, I was having a conversation with someone, they came up to me one day and they told me that you're only going to be as rich as the five people you keep closest around you. And he said, and so what did I do? The next day, I I dumped all of my broke friends. And I was totally shocked by that. I was like, man, wow, that sounds so cruel. But then I started thinking about like the implications of that, which for me, it helped me to recognize that the people I had in my sphere of influence were negatively impacting me. And I was never going to change when I kept having these negative thoughts, actions, reactions, habits, constantly reinforces something that was normal, right? Like,
Mhm.
you sit there on the phone with someone and they want to gossip all day long about every single person in your friend group. It doesn't, it normalizes that kind of like negative thinking, you know, and it also creates this idea of distrust in yourself. Well, what is that person saying about me? And it makes you insecure, and then you're hanging out with your friends and everybody wants to, drink and do drugs and do all this kind of stuff all the time. And there's this idea of stuff like, somebody's supposed to drink. Oh, that's alcohol abuse, right? That's toxic, right? Why do you need to be that addicted to alcohol? If you spill a shot on the floor, oh, it's alcohol abuse, right? We
Mhm.
normalize this kind of behavior in society. So because I was so insecure and because I lacked the impulse control to be able to govern myself at that time, I actually just made the choice to remove not just the toxic people, but literally everyone from my life because I didn't know. I didn't know who was toxic, what was toxic, how innocuous that was. Like I could recognize certain like gross toxic behaviors, but at that point in my life I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't
Mhm.
understand the delicacies by which toxicity could be expressed. And so I literally chose to break up with everyone essentially in my life and to spend time, first of all, with myself, just getting to know myself and my own inherent value and being comfortable with myself, being comfortable being alone, which was something I had never been able to do in my life. And then to slowly over time start like contemplate each person, in my phone. Who is this person? Who are they to me? What was our relationship like? How did I feel in that relationship? Did I feel pressured? Did I feel anxious? Did I feel like I had to be someone that wasn't myself? Or did this person really value me and express unconditional love to me? And I slowly started integrating people back into my life. And let me just tell you, yeah, there were a lot of people who were very unhappy with that decision that I made for myself. But I can tell you very assuredly and with confidence, it was literally one of the best decisions I ever made. I don't dislike any of the people that I choose to bring back into my life or hate them. I just recognized that I was not the person that I needed to be at that time to where I could, exhibit control over myself, and being around people who express that kind of stuff. And, have I attempted to reintegrate them back into my life now? No, I haven't. Even though I could handle it, I recognize that what I want in my life is value at every step of the way. Every relationship, I want it to be valuable both ways. I want to be able to give and receive, not in a commerce kind of way, but in a no, just a true unconditional love kind of way, to where I know if my friend needs me, they know I'm going to take time out for them, that I'm going to be there solely for them. And that if I need something, even if it's just to be alone, that my friends are going to recognize that that's my need too, and that we support each other. I I I will not at this point in my life throw myself away into people who do not want to have a true reciprocal relationship that's based on health, love, trust, consistency. It's not worth it. I'm happy to help people who are not in that space, but I'm unwilling to invest myself in a true, deep, meaningful relationship with people that are unwilling to be in that space, because it drains me and it keeps me from doing the things that I need to do, like being there for my son, my family, my friends, and engaging in my spiritual path and other things that are meaningful to me. So it's an unpopular choice, it's an unpopular decision, but it was a valuable decision. And personally, regardless, I think, of what path you take, whether it's the type of path that you took, where you changed yourself first and then watched how people kind of naturally filtered out of your life and new people were brought in, or you just remove them and give your space to work on yourself and then reintegrate people or find new people into your life. The truth is, hands down, having toxic relationships in your life must be a no go. It has to be a non starter. You'll never learn self love, have self love, achieve self love, or be able to act out of self love or out of true love for others and understand what love really means, as long as you keep reinforcing behaviors that are not indicative of love.
Yeah. I'm curious about something. I was thinking about like what you said about how you just cleared out your life. Um, when people that were healthy came into your life in the midst of you making this shift, were you able to connect with them? Because I'm just thinking about how that happened for you, because for me, I didn't feel like I couldn't make that connection. I couldn't understand that person. There was no way of relating to them. I didn't feel like I had anything in common. The way I thought was different than them. It didn't seem like, it almost felt like they were, um, conceited, or, just full of themselves or whatever, because my perception of it, the view that I had was so, distorted. And that's why I'm curious, like, when you decided to X people out, you still hadn't done the healing yet. So how did you respond to people that were healthy? Or did you give yourself quiet space for a while until you got to that healing space to be able to accept healthy people in your life? Like, how did that play out?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely, you know, it was definitely more within the space of the second example, of the latter example here. I
Mhm.
actually took a significant amount of time away from myself,
Yeah.
um, and really did not engage with anyone, actually, for a few years.
Wow.
At the time when this happened to me initially, it was during the pandemic, and I I had an experience that was very traumatizing to me mentally and emotionally. And I was trying to just kind of push it away, and I just kept getting bombarded with, everybody wanted to text, call, everybody was stuck at home, right? And I just became like super overwhelmed. And I actually thought at the time I was having a mental breakdown. Um, what I came to realize later is I was going through a very deep spiritual transformative process. Um, and I felt like at the time I just couldn't. I was too overwhelmed, and so I just,
Mhm.
everybody, like literally everybody. And it was really scary. I mean, I was so afraid of what people were going to think, and I made everyone mad, and everybody's going to hate me. I probably, like, the first year I took off, right, where really literally the only people I was talking to at that point were my son and his father, and a, a few of, I'm talking like less than a handful of people in my spiritual order that I
Mhm.
knew I could trust, that had
Mhm.
demonstrated they were trustworthy over,
Mhm.
a decade or more of knowing them. Um, I dealt with just like with trying to handle the guilt,
Mhm.
right? Because I was so impacted by how, you know, what others thought of me and expectations of others. So I actually had to like rid myself of that first.
Mhm.
And it took almost a year. And
Wow.
then in the second year, that's when I started being, when I was finally empty of all of that conditioning,
Mhm.
that I had gone through in my life, then I was able to start actually getting to know myself,
Mhm.
right? And I engaged in, I guess, what I would call like a love affair with myself, right? Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I dated me. I bought me flowers. I treated myself the way that I would want someone else to treat me.
Mhm.
And that was a very shocking for me. It really helped me to understand things like how I need love and how I express love,
Uh-huh.
which, is talked about in that book, The Love Languages, which is amazing, by the way, if you haven't read it. So it took me a whole year just to even learn how to love myself,
Mhm.
by essentially courting myself and not
Mhm.
having my feelings of self-love be um, you know, derived off of others' actions towards me and stuff, right? Finally, in like the third year, that's when I started like kind of my reintegration process where I started
Mhm.
slowly, allowing myself to engage in like more significant relationships and stuff like that
Mhm.
with people based now on a clearer viewpoint of my life and a newfound confidence in who I was and a strength that, should something come up, I could deal with it
Mhm.
appropriately, right, and not in a toxic way. Um, so was I feel like the general overall process was, pretty much there wasn't anyone around. There were a few
Mhm.
people that I remained in contact with, but aside from my son, I didn't have regular contact with anyone. The few people I stayed in contact with in my spiritual order were people I would just check in with from time to time to let them know I was okay, maybe to talk about like a spiritual transformation I was going through, get some advice, outside perspective, so I wasn't completely totally in my head. But primarily, I was really letting my higher self guide me over a
Mhm.
process of emptying myself totally, then
Mhm.
refilling myself with the spirit, then reintegrating this newfound consciousness and kind of expression of my internal landscape into kind of the greater
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting how you went about that. Um, I kind of, I found that I kinda took the approach of, it's it's a really interesting thing because I kinda believe, sort of an abstract belief of what the world is. I see the world as everything in front of me and everything around me is a construct of my own personal belief structure. So if everything around me is bad, the only way to fix that is to fix this. And so I had to so every single time something goes on, and you know this because you and I've had conversations, like if somebody treats me a certain way and I don't like it, my first response is, what is it about me that I need to change? because um I have to I have to be that way. So like the idea that I have is if this is happening, then the only way to change that is to change this. So, and I started doing these experiments like I've part of this belief structure I have is if you need more love in your life, be more loving. If you need more friends in your life, be a better friend. If you want whatever it is that you want, you have to become. So I started doing that. And I started applying things like I even didn't like the relationship, for example, of the way my mom and I interacted. So I decided that I was going to treat her the way that I wanted her to treat me. And I just kept on doing that over and over again. Instead of erasing people, I started becoming the person that I wanted them to be in my life. And it was the weirdest thing. They all shifted. It was almost like I kind of like say it's almost like I jumped into another dimension. Like I everybody and I remember when my dad was alive, he and I were having this conversation, and he said, "I remember you telling me that at some point you felt like you entered the twilight zone." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It was like all of a sudden you're different. All of a sudden mom's different." And he goes, "Why do you think that happened?" And I said, "I think that when I changed, I shifted into another reality." and and it was a reality where that person that I changed into was in alignment with these other people. And and I have this belief that that if you want to believe something, you've got to test it out and see if that is if it's actually true. So if you want to say I believe that if I do this, this will happen, then do it and see what happens and see if that matches up with your belief structure. So, all of these things that I'm telling you, I actually applied, I actually did. And I started noticing these things like, okay, well, if this is true, I'm going to test it out and see what happens. And that's how my universe started shifting for me was because I did everything internally. Um, I don't know that I could have had the strength that you had at that time. I
And
don't
honestly, I feel like there's an argument that maybe your approach was the stronger one, but truthfully speaking, I think really the crux of the two examples is that
Mhm,
it it's dependent upon the person,
mhm,
right? It's dependent upon where their consciousness is and what they need. At that point in my life, I had been what I recognize now was going through a number of like, you know, mini spiritual cycles, purifying and raising my consciousness. But what I entered into at that particular phase in my life, where I kind of just had to go into complete and total solitude, was like a total transformation of my consciousness,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
There's elevations where we change our perception and we see things differently, and we see our universe and stuff start to shift and change, and we recognize the interplay between our internal world and the external world. And then there are these major alchemical transformational processes that, essentially just completely, like completely 100% change you, right? It's
mhm,
that death, that's like the true death and rebirth process,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
You're completely dying to who you were before and being reborn into something new. I am not the same person I was three
mhm.
years ago. Absolutely not.
Well,
Um,
this is interesting you're saying this because, I was just having a conversation with, Papa Doc, and we were just it wasn't a recording, it was just a conversation we were having, and because he was explaining something that he's doing some kind of challenge thing, and he was telling me about it, and I was like, "Well, explain this to me because I don't understand." And so he was talking about like taking people through these different alchemical spaces, but it wasn't the four um elements. He was taking them through seven stages. And as I was asking him, it was really interesting because it kind of like made me think about something. Like when we're going through alchemical changes, why it's so rough? Because in every element that we master, we're good. Like for instance, like when we're in air, and I'm all air. It's all, and you master that. So you're like, you become the master of air. And then you enter into water. It's like, you know, because you're air going into water. You're literally a completely almost like toxic element entering into this. And it's like tsunami. So you have to become water. So it's like you have to leave the space that you were in and become something else. So it's like everything that you and well, I know you've done a long time ago, but for me, it's like it's literally like a rebirth every single time you go through that alchemical shift of where I was leaving and where I'm going. I mean, it makes so much sense to me. And like what you were saying, it just like really made that connection. And I was like, oh my God, this is so true. It's like you have to keep on going through these rebirths. And I remember thinking, I'm doing a 180 every single time. It's like another 180, another 180. And every time you get better, you get stronger, you become um more empowered. And I and then I was talking to Mercurio, brother Mercurio. He was talking about the lessons that we learn as we go up higher and we get to another level. Those lessons get harder. It's like if I if I was to look at those lessons that I'm actually going through like currently, years ago, I wouldn't have been able to contemplate it, I wouldn't have been able to understand it, I would have had major meltdowns, I probably would have been in a mental hospital. Now I look at it as a challenging game that I'm working through, and what are the answers, and I gotta look for the clues and all that kind of stuff because every level that you go through gets harder. It's more complex, you can't go into it with the same mindset as the level you were before. You've got to figure it all out. You've got to wipe it clean, rebirth, start all over and make this whole shift. And it's like, "Oh my god, I've got to create a whole new mind again." It's
Yeah.
it's crazy. You know?
Well, it seems crazy. Um, the idea of the inconsistency, I feel like, is scary for people. Um, but I feel like it also just really expresses the beauty of the infinite nature of consciousness
Mhm.
and how we can experience so many different, states of awareness. And you know that's why there's certain types of medicine that are appropriate for different phases, right? Like sometimes the medicine is to, recognize a challenging situation and ask, okay, can I reflect something different in myself and see it reflected on the outside? Or, maybe the medicine is recognizing your weakness and inability to do that and just resetting the board. Or
Mhm.
maybe, the medicine is for you to engage in a particular technique or immerse yourself in, um, a new perspective with, other people. Like they're really, I feel like there's certain phases of transformation where having solitude, is a requisite. But there's certain phases of transformation where you have to be integrated with others too, right? There's
Mm,
and the medicine that is appropriate for one phase of transformation isn't always appropriate for another, which is why you almost have to relearn the landscape every time. But that doesn't mean that it's without any kind of consistency, right? There
mhm,
are certain things that, I feel like are applicable at every single phase of transformation that, and to me, they represent the underlying formula of transformation so that if you engage in those particular key steps at every phase of your transformation, you're going to be successful. And I see that we're at like an hour. So
mhm,
I say, let's leave it on a cliffhanger and let's
mhm.
let our next episode be about identifying the key aspects of personal spiritual transformation and the strategies that can always be applied to give you the appropriate tools to move through
I
the
think
different
I
phases.
think it's good. I think that regardless of the way that you do it, it's there's one thing that you and I have in common. It's that we worked on ourselves. Regardless, you got rid of everybody and focused on yourself. I focused on myself and eventually they faded out. And the people started they just weren't in alignment anymore. And much of a higher vibrational people started coming in my direction. However, it is that you choose to do this, the thing is that we are working on ourselves, and that's the key component, is that transformation has to happen inside of yourself. And so we will give you some really good tips on how to do that next week. And I hope you guys enjoy this, and we'll see you soon.
Have a blessed